A little bit, just to get into the first kind of thing that I wanted to ask about is a lot of our people that listen are in small to medium, maybe as large as small enterprise or traditional companies that if they haven't even considered diversity and inclusion as part of their business, but maybe they want to. If they're listening to this webinar, they probably are, or at least it's piqued their interest at some level. How do you make that a priority, and what benefits would be easy to position to a business that maybe hasn't prioritized this?
Yeah, yeah. I think the smallest, but one of potentially the most uncomfortable, but also most impactful steps is to simply start the conversation. I know that it's, especially like you said, in a smaller company or in a more traditional industry, talking about diversity and inclusion can be a really difficult or like taboo in a sense topic to go over. And so just having the conversation, bringing it up is a major step in the right direction and one that can get the juices flowing, hopefully with leadership. And I think too, the biggest selling point is that there's just a ton of value that comes with being more inclusive in your marketing campaigns or just even in the overall company, like internally as well. Buying power of diverse communities is huge. I mean, you can see that uh, different diverse communities have tons of buying power. Add it all together, Hispanic, Black, LGBTQ plus Asian and people with disabilities have over 40% of total US buying power. If you factor in women, I think that ends up at doubling the number of buying power as well too. And so the more inclusive you can be in representation, in making sure that people feel like they're welcome to shop at and be a part of your brand and your company and your services and your products, the more likely you're going to be able to attract those dollars and get those people into your fold in an authentic way that then gets them talking about your business to their friends and therefore sort of does some of the marketing work for you as well too.
The way that your business manifests, maybe online or in kind of real life space, is driven by your marketing team or your content team. A lot of times you'll have wing of the business has some diversity, but as the marketing team, the stuff that's going to manifest online, even product marketing, how do you prioritize that within the company and say, hey, this is our content team, this is our marketing team? It's probably going to represent how we manifest into the world. Is that something that's separate or is it combined as an effort?
Yeah, it goes back to hiring processes, right? Like you need the best way to have inclusive messaging to make sure that you're thinking about things in an inclusive way, to communicate to these communities in a more authentic way as well, is to have people on your team that are a part of those communities as much as possible. It's not always possible to have every single demographic necessarily represented, but if something like 20% of the US population is Hispanic, do you have 2 out of 10, 1 out of 5? I guess that's the lowest. Over 1 out of 5 people at your company, are they Hispanic or not? If not, can you get closer to that so that you have those more unique and accurate depictions of the world around you internally as well? And then that will naturally, hopefully, manifest into other conversations, into other opportunities, um, and so on and so forth. It's like the fact that most CEOs and most C-level folks are white men. That's not great when we're talking about being inclusive and making sure that communities are represented and making sure that people feel comfortable to have a seat at the table because that sense of belonging and that sense of inclusion comes from the top in many cases. And to put the burden solely on the people that you're hiring also isn't going to be successful necessarily. It needs to be very much like a lived and breathed part of your entire company. Having that accountability is also a really important factor that people should be able to feel comfortable, again, having those more difficult conversations around inclusion and diversity.
How do you make this not be a short term thing, like a small campaign or a thing we did to check off the box, which is terribly unfortunately, and make it a mid to long term initiative that everybody's always thinking about? Because that's really the thing that I, frequently, unfortunately, judge when I'm looking at businesses and I see, is this an always on thing or was this a flavor of the month, unfortunately?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. I think the biggest problem that can come up is that folks approach diversity and inclusion efforts, especially in marketing campaigns, as what you said, the flavor of the month. June is Pride Month, so let's make sure we have a rainbow logo. February is Black History Month, so let's make sure that we highlight some of our Black employees. Like September through October is Hispanic Heritage Month. Let's focus on some Latinx change makers. It's not, it's great to have representation and to talk about those things when they're especially relevant. But if you're not thinking about how those people are making contributions year round, like the title of this webinar says, you're not going to be coming off in an authentic way. And I'm obviously, as I described myself earlier, a white, cisgender, male presenting person as well. So I definitely don't and can't speak for every single minority group, and even the diverse, all of the alphabet soup that is the LGBTQ umbrella as well. But thinking from more of the queer perspective that I bring, coming in with things like gender neutral pronouns in your copy, both in your blog posts and your emails, not making the mistake of assuming that every couple that shops your products, if you're an e-com or D2C retailer, is in a heterosexual relationship, using things like partner instead of girlfriend or boyfriend during Valentine's Day. Things like, yeah, making sure that when you're going into creative photo shoots and getting these images from places that are hopefully not just based on stock imagery, that you're making these conscious efforts on a daily basis to, again, depict the world that you see around you, not the world that you're familiar with necessarily.
Thinking about inauthentic or things that one might want to watch out for, or things not to drive the bus, not to be as your mission of this. How would you approach a team maybe that in the past has maybe done something that was more of a one-time initiative and it didn't go as well? How would you go about saying what we meant to do it? How do you fix that? How do you get that into a better place?
Yeah, I think it starts with what your goal is for your campaign. Are you doing this simply to check a box? Are you doing this simply for some PR and notoriety and to have people be like, wow, you're so great because you celebrated this particular awareness month and that's awesome? You're probably not going to get the reaction that you want the same way that you would by taking those smaller steps that we're even talking about and just including it as like a general guide for everything that you're doing. That usually translates a little bit more successfully. I think to ignoring communities altogether is an issue. It wasn't any client of mine, thankfully. It was a brand that I was made aware of on Twitter, but they were called out, for example, they're a beauty brand. So again, beauty brands are usually pretty great, but
Right.
not every beauty brand is created equally, right? Their whole Instagram feed, if you scroll down, was all white women, all white cisgender women with long hair. So it's like, okay, this is literally one depiction of what a woman looks like. This is one depiction of what your customer looks like. Then they got called out for it. And then every 1 out of 5 posts, then they would maybe post a Black woman. But again, they didn't go any farther than that. They didn't have any gender diversity. They didn't have any like atypical, whatever their depiction of what a woman looked like in their imagery and ads. You're ignoring people. You're not acknowledging that there is diversity in the world. And that's extremely inauthentic in that sense. I think too, watering down messaging is an issue that a lot of people have. If you're too scared of saying the right thing, you can sometimes then not say anything at all or avoid saying, and that becomes a problem again because you're not taking a stand.
Another thing when it comes to content and it comes to 2022, you're talking about a lot of outputs of software, right? You're talking about different ways that software produces text, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
generation or whether it's information retrieval driven websites, internal search or a web search engine. How has your kind of perspective changed on that? And for me, one example here would be if you're using text that's coming from an outsourcer that you've never worked with, and you're not checking it for these types of biases, it's similar to generated content. If you're just publishing, certainly that's a nightmare for me. I'm guessing a nightmare for you. But what are the other ways that not just making sure you scan it to make sure that it's not horrible, but what are the other things that you've seen in the market that have made you think it can't just come out of a computer or an artificial intelligence thing and then be manifest as being your brand message?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. One example that comes to mind that also is part of this conversation is there's a lot of bias inherently that go into technology and software is based on the people who are creating them. And Google was called out recently for some of the algorithms that were favoring white people in the search results versus BIPOC communities as well. The prominent example that comes to mind is when you searched professional hairstyles up until I think it was like a year or two ago, honestly, that they fixed it finally. All of the professional quote unquote hairstyles were depicted on white cisgender people. There was no diversity in the hairstyles, and it was all very much like the same images, the same content that was being written about it. And if you search unprofessional hairstyles, it was black hairstyles. It was hairstyles for people who were gender nonconforming that were showing up. And that's obviously not what unprofessional hair is, but through the tools and through the perpetuation of what's on this page one of the search engine results pages. How should we position this? Oh, it looks like everybody's writing about these hairstyles as professional and these ones as unprofessional. And so then the people who write the content or the keyword research tools that you're using to find them or the outlines that you're creating are going to have those biases.